Hi, everyone. Welcome to MIT Open Learning Talks. My name is Ellen Wiltrout. I'm the Director of Online and Blended Learning Initiatives for the Department of Biology. I oversee a group who develops MOOCs for the department in collaboration with the faculty, as well as work on digital learning projects with them for their MIT students. Unfortunately, Tanya Baker can't be with us today as she wished. But I did want to take a minute to highlight the importance of Tanya's role in the work that we do. As department head, Tanya Baker created the group that still exists today, and she was instrumental in creating that and supporting work in digital learning early on. And in collaboration with what is now MIT Open Learning, Tanya created my position and set up the other positions that now exist. So we have to thank Tanya for her continued support in this, and even in the early days when people were unsure and didn't know what the future would bring. I'm delighted to be here today with Katie Blackwell. And Katie and I are going to discuss some research that Katie worked on over the last year or so. And we're going to also just have a discussion about online learning and MOOCs in this period as well. First, let's go over some housekeeping. I just want to give an outline of what we're going to do today. I'll go over some general ideas of what the Digital Learning Lab is and what work we do. Then I'm going to have Katie introduce herself and go over some highlights of her research. Then we're going to bring that back to a discussion about online learning. And finally, we'll leave time at the end, the last 15 minutes, hopefully, for question and answer from the audience. When we do the question and answer, feel free to put your questions in the chat then or at any point in today's meeting. Janine and Catherine are watching and moderating the chat during this talk. And we'll have also at the end, if you do want to ask your question on camera, you can raise your hand and then someone can set you up so that you can speak on camera. All right, so with that, let's just get started. So first, I'm going to go over what is the Digital Learning Lab, what is the MITx Biology group and what we do, discuss our first MOOC that we created, it's 700x Introduction to Biology, and how that's set up for the research that we're going to go over today. So the Digital Learning Lab is a group that I was part of from the beginning before it was even called the Digital Learning Lab. It really was a group of people who were working on MOOCs early on, and we met for lunch to discuss our common things that we were working on, these projects. We were from different departments and different disciplines, but we really had a lot of commonalities in the work that we were doing. Eventually, MIT, what is now Open Learning, defined this group as the Digital Learning Lab and supported this group throughout all this time. And so with that, this group, who we are is really that we have academic appointments in our individual departments, and we have discipline expertise in that department. So for myself, I have a PhD in biology, and we have a lot of experience in teaching and knowing about the research behind teaching. We have other areas of expertise like technology, managing people or projects, design, data analysis, or this application of the learning sciences. And what really makes someone successful in this sort of work is being able to act as a change agent in the department and at MIT, and being able to work closely with the faculty and being able to have a growth mindset in that you see a problem and figure out solutions to something new. And so in our department, we call our group, initially it's the MITx Biology group. And so it exists, primarily there's 3 people in the Digital Learning Lab in that group: Darcy Gordon, who's an instructor, and Caitlin Friend, who is a postdoc in the group right now, and myself. And we also work closely with 2 other instructors in the department, Monica Vello and Summer Morell, who oversees the TA training, and Moni oversees the biology GIR. And so we work closely with the faculty on their education projects, and especially the digital learning side is working closely on the MOOCs and other hybrid learning experiences. So with our first MOOC in the Department of Biology was 700X Introduction to Biology, The Secret of Life. We created this course under the leadership of Eric Lander. And even before the group really existed in the department, we were creating this MOOC. We launched it in March 2013. And we, it was the early days when we really didn't know, what direction MOOCs would go, how to do this. We were really figuring it out as we went. And from that, we could see that there was a learning curve, and that led to creation of positions within departments to continue this work. And so that MOOC, the Introduction to Biology, has evolved over time from the early days of having more traditional problem sets and exams that ran on a schedule to now in roughly 2016, we started what we call the competency exam model. And in that model, we leave materials open for learning in a self-paced way that auditors can join for free and work through really all the original course materials. So videos, problem sets, exams, and they can do this. And if they feel ready and they want a certificate, they can sign up for the verified track. And the verified track has a small fee, but that verified track allows them to take the competency exam during a specific week. And this exam is set up to be really a test of mastery. Do you understand the materials? And a test on learning objectives from across the entire course instead of just pieces at a time. And we designed it so there's things like randomization, no feedback on answers, so that it's not best for learning, but it's best for this sort of assessment and also for the integrity of the exam. So that we did other research that we know this design works well for preventing any dishonest activity in the exam. So with that, during the pandemic, we noticed a lot of attention back on MOOCs, and we noticed a lot of activity, especially in this Introduction to Biology course. And so that led us to start asking questions about more details on the engagement in this MOOC and others. And so with that, we completed some research that Katie is going to talk about in a minute. And we wrote a paper for the EMOOC conference that happened. And so Katie presented on this work in June, this past June. And so, but now she has a chance to share it again with this audience today. So Katie, I'm going to turn it over to you now. And can you tell everyone about yourself and give a little bit of introduction?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you, Mary Ellen. So my name is Katie Blackwell. I use she, her pronouns, and I am currently a first-year graduate student in the Department of Biology at MIT. But prior to that, and while I was doing this research, I was an undergraduate at the University of Texas at Dallas. I'm getting my degree, achieved my degree in biochemistry, molecular biology, with a secondary focus in secondary STEM education. So kind of like what Mary Ellen described is sort of the goal of the MITx Biology team, as we're all scientists and educators at the same time. So I began this work as a MSRP student, the Bernie and Sophie Gould MIT Summer Research Program, as it's now called, and in biology. So we're a little bit separate from MSRP General. And this is a summer program that brings students from all over the United States to MIT for a summer research for 10 weeks. And unfortunately, I was in the first and hopefully only online cohort, because this was in 2020, from June to August. And it was actually because of the pandemic that I was able to conduct this research with Mary Ellen through MSRP. Without this pandemic, I would have come as an in-person student, would have worked in a wet lab on a biology project, and would have gone home. But instead, without the constraints of geography and with the power of the internet, I was able to work with Mary Ellen and the MITx Biology team during the summer, and then after the summer, to continue this research into what started as a very broad question, which was how did the pandemic impact learner engagement? And my part in this was specifically in 700X, which is the Introduction to Biology MOOC that Mary Ellen just described.
Great, thank you, Katie. So how about, do you want to walk through some of your most significant findings that you had during your time conducting this research?
Yeah, I'd absolutely love to. Before I show you any fun graphs or slides, I'll actually describe a little bit more of our motivation and how we began analysis for this course. So one of the biggest challenges we started with was, how do you define engagement? We had noticed that MOOC platforms were seeing a large rise in people visiting their websites and people signing up for MOOCs, but enrollment isn't necessarily engagement. And so we wanted to figure out, well, what is engagement and how can we show that it has changed, if it has changed at all during the pandemic? We did this through a variety of metrics, ranging in different levels of difficulty for students. So these MOOCs consist of videos, they consist of practice problems, and they also have forums where students can interact with each other and also with moderators of the course. And so we use these various student engagements as a form of engagement and seeing how, the scale at which people are interacting with 700X and how that varied pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. So to do this, we compared 5 different runs of 700X, this intro bio course. We compared the 3 runs immediate to the pandemic. So these were in 2019, and then 2 runs that occurred during the pandemic, one of which occurred right at the beginning of the pandemic in March 2020, and another immediately after this run in July 2020. And what I will do now is actually show you what we started with, which was enrollment. As I mentioned, we saw a lot of changes in the number of students. If I could get someone to confirm that this looks good. Thanks, Mary Ellen. Awesome. So what we'll see consistently through my slides is you'll see color-coded graphs. So these graphs are coded so that it's a little bit easier to tell when was pandemic and when was pre-pandemic. In blue and green, you'll see pre-pandemic, and then in pandemic, you'll see orange and red. And so we can tell from that very first orange line that we got a significant boost in the number of learners who were joining our course. And this actually correlates fairly well with when the World Health Organization declared that COVID-19 was a world pandemic. At first, before this declaration, it looked like the course was on track to meet a very similar number of enrolled learners as previous runs. And instead, we ended up with almost 3 times more by the time we closed enrollment, which is marked by that little X. In the second run during the pandemic, which was started in July, we see that we still have more enrolled learners than in previous pre-pandemic runs, but we're starting to drop from what we're starting to think is an all-time high for early pandemic enrollment. Unfortunately, I haven't taken a look at this course recently, but we'd like to see. We'll take a look in the future and get back to you on whether or not this actually returned to normal or pre-pandemic levels. So the next thing we did is, so as you can see, when we look at enrollment, there's a very big difference in the number of students between runs. And if we want to compare en masse engagement, we need to use proportions or percentages. And so this is what we did. So rather than comparing the sheer number of people doing certain things in our course, we instead changed these into proportions or percentages. And one thing we defined is this idea of participation. So someone who is enrolled in the course has signed up for it. It's added to their toolbar on edX, but that doesn't mean that they were actually engaging or doing anything in the course itself. And so to be classified as a participant, someone had to actually click into the course materials themselves and not just hit the enroll button. So there's a little bit more energy that they need to put in to be classified as a participant. So what we found is that the percent of learners who actually participated in the class online in March 2020 was much higher than it had been prior. But then we actually see July, the percentage falls, even though we've still got quite a lot more participants overall than pre-pandemic classes and runs of this course. And so this is our first hint that something might be different in the idea of engagement between pre-pandemic and pandemic runs of this course. Because if we're already seeing that there is something of a high point of learners just clicking into the course, and then a low point that might indicate that there's also changes in the way the learners interact with course materials. And so our next look was to classify from our participants people who were engaged with course materials. And so we classified these with the 3 metrics I mentioned earlier. To be considered engaged, an individual had to either post to the forum at least once, had to either interact with a problem at least once, or click on and play a video at least once. And so we've broken these people out by whether they were engaged in those actions here for each course run. Pre-pandemic, again, being in those shades of blue and green, and then early pandemic in orange, and July 2020 in red. And so the first thing we noticed is that the forum engagement went up quite significantly during the pandemic, in both runs of the pandemic as well. And I know anecdotally from people who were running the forums during this time, they also noticed something of an overwhelming boost in people chatting on the forums, talking to each other, asking questions and that sort of thing. But the next thing we actually found was somewhat interesting is that in July, our second pandemic run, we see a decrease in the number of participants who are viewing videos. And so this is interesting because videos are some of the primary ways that they actually learn new information in the course. And so if their video watching behavior is different, perhaps this is a sign of some difference between runs for not only for pre-pandemic to pandemic, but actually within the pandemic runs themselves. And so when we look further actually into these video views, so what I'll do actually real quick is go back and show you. So what this pink box is highlighting here is that there are fewer students viewing videos. And then when we look at the number of videos that all those students viewed, we see that in July 2020, those who viewed videos also viewed less videos. So we have less students viewing videos, and then those students who actually did view videos are viewing fewer of them when compared to, I'll show that box again in orange, March, our certified viewers, or certified learners who viewed a very large number, if not most of the videos in the course. Also take a moment here to describe, Mary Ellen mentioned auditors and verifiers. So by default, everyone in the course is enrolled as an auditor. It's free for them to access just about everything except to the final competency exam. If they choose the verified track, which as she mentioned comes with a small fee, which during the pandemic was waived for some students. So some people pay for it, some people don't. It depends on personal situations. But verifiers are often used as some sort of wobbly metric for how dedicated students are to finishing the course. And then certified means that they actually did earn their certification at the end of the course. So they were verified and then passed the competency exam. So just to summarize again, we saw less people viewing videos and less videos viewed overall. From here, we also were very interested in this difference between verification and certification between runs. And so what we did is we took a percentage of all the participants that we had and calculated how many of them actually chose verified track during the pandemic. And as we can see here, this black line is showing the mean, pre-pandemic mean of how many participants tended to choose verified track. And we see that in March, we get a boost, and then in July, we get an even nicer boost of those who are choosing to join the verified track and indicating some level of dedication to completing the course. However, when we look at certification rates, and here we'll see that this is percent of those who earned certification out of everyone who chose to be verified. We actually see a dip in July 2020, and that these students are very gung-ho about actually verify when they join the verified track, but aren't necessarily completing the course at the end and getting a satisfactory score on their competency exams. We actually performed this analysis 2 ways. So this one in the middle that I'm showing you, this is percent certified out of everyone who chose the verified track. But we thought that perhaps it might be interesting to look at these numbers out of those who attempted the competency exam. There is some level of students that even when they pay for the verified track, decide they are done with the course halfway through and they never come back to it. That's the nature of online learning as people drop out. And so we redid this analysis by also just checking how many of them certified out of those who even tried the exam. And we get a pretty significant change. So if we look at just those who certified out of everyone who verified, we get maybe about 18% of people actually earn their certification. But when they make the attempt, we get more like half of students earn their certification. And I'll actually leave you with this very last metric. So one thing we were interested in is the correlation, or perhaps an influx, where are all these new students coming from, and are any of them students in other institutions? So this is 700X. Intro Bio is an edX course. We get people from all countries. I believe more than 160 countries represented in the course, with each course run, people of all ages and backgrounds. And so we were curious, well, are these students from other universities, or are they teachers at other universities, or are they somehow affiliated with higher ed? And what we found in the pandemic is that among verified and certified learners, the proportion of whom were affiliated with the university in some way, meaning they signed up with the .edu email address, went up quite a lot compared to the pre-pandemic. So this indicates perhaps they're using 700X Intro Bio as a supplement to another course that they're taking at their university. Perhaps an instructor pointed them to the course and said, we're still figuring out this online learning thing back when we were in the early months of the pandemic. Here, go take this class on edX or something of the sort. And so this was fascinating to us, and we definitely are looking into digging into this deeper. And so with that, I'll actually just show real quick all the people that Mary Ellen mentioned and the people who made this such a wonderful research experience for me. Darcy, Ming, Moni, Summer, Caitlin, Martha, and Lillian, who were also MSRP students at the same time I was, and of course, Mary Ellen herself.
Thank you, Katie. So I'm really glad that you were able to highlight some things in the data, including the importance of people who are either enrolled as students or other teachers or researchers at universities who are using these MOOCs, as well as something that we definitely noticed pre-pandemic, just highlighting the fact that so many sign up for the verified track but don't even take the exam. So calculating those numbers about who's actually trying versus just signing up for one track or the other is important as well. So I'm glad you were able to highlight those as well. And Katie and I both want to take a moment to also recognize the work that Martha and Lillian did that she just mentioned. So Martha Castro, she worked on a similar question as Katie, but she worked on the 705X biochemistry MOOC. And Lillian Delacruz, she was working on a molecular biology MOOC that we have that's more of an advanced molecular biology course. And so what Martha and Lillian also found is that they were definitely seeing very similar trends in enrollment, but the engagement data did differ from what Katie was what she found in Introduction to Biology. In general, I think the Introduction to Biology course had the most impact, probably because it's the entry point where the most people would start coming to MOOCs. Our more advanced course in molecular biology had the fewest differences between pre-pandemic and during the pandemic. And then our biochemistry course was somewhere in the middle, which makes sense. It's really like the step after the Introduction to Biology course. We also were really lucky with this Introduction to Biology course that it started March 2020, just by the coincidence of the timing. So it really was a cutoff point of pre-pandemic for compared to post-pandemic. And with our other courses, we may have been in the middle of a run or not exactly that perfect timing that we had with this situation. And so, yeah, like Katie mentioned, we could tell on the forums, there was more engagement. We could tell from the messages, there were more people from other schools and more people who were just completely new to MOOCs that were joining during this time. And so, Katie, I wanted to ask you some more about your personal experience, because you went from being a student that during the pandemic was taking in-person courses, got transitioned to online courses. Then you signed up for a research program that ended up being a remote research program in which you studied online courses. So there's a lot of perspectives there. and personal viewpoints. So do you want to just tell everyone what that experience was like for you?
Yeah. So I am probably in a somewhat small group of people where being in an online class was not a new experience. So most of my middle school and high school education was public education via online format. Not quite like a MOOC, but somewhere between a traditional high school experience in person and something like a MOOC. So when we returned, my first thought when we returned to online learning, or at least I've returned to online learning, was, wow, I did not expect to have to do this again. And there was a little bit of an adjustment period, but then, you start to get used to Zoom classes or asynchronous learning again. I think the interesting thing for me was then this was at the pandemic was in my final semester of my senior year. So I was already headed out for the most part. I just had to finish up my last classes. And when I signed up for the MSRP program, I expected it to be in person, and then had my fingers crossed, both of them, like praying, please don't cancel this thing too. And thankfully that Mandana Sasanthar, who runs the program, was able to find a way to get all of us who had been accepted before the pandemic into virtual projects. And so that's why I mentioned, I wouldn't have gotten the chance to work with Mary Ellen if it hadn't been for the pandemic, because I would have been in a wet lab working on a biology project. And instead I got to pick up an entirely new set of skills, use some of my experience as a teacher and as a student to investigate the question that I just discussed with you.
No, great. So I think during this time, during the pandemic, it also let me reflect on how there were similarities between this time and when MOOCs were first starting. And so I think, reflecting back on being thankful that Tanya had the mindset that digital learning would continue and, be more important into the future, so that there was an existing group in the department, and that she wanted to be leaders and not followers in this. So that's why she committed to this early on. And we also had, what I thought was interesting is that there was a lot of attention and discussion about teaching. And we had that same thing happen when MOOC started. Even though not everyone was participating in developing a MOOC, there was just a lot of debate about how should people teach online, and how is that different from what was happening in person. And then during the pandemic, everyone was forced to go online and teach and really rethink their teaching, and what's important to keep, what's not important to keep, and what format they're going to use to try to keep students engaged during that time period. So it was interesting that there were a lot of similarities and differences. And we, luckily, as a team, we were able to really help support the faculty make that transition, because Moni, she was working with the GIRs, but also she worked with the 703 genetics course. Summer was working with the GIRs in this transition. Caitlin, who was initially not part of the group as a postdoc, but she was a learning technologist, and she was helping everyone. We also made the transition to Canvas at MIT during this time, and helping everyone set up their Canvas sites. And Darcy did a lot of work with the 705 biochemistry course and the 706 cell biology course. So we were all doing what we could in these courses, and we were lucky that so many of them, at least our undergraduate core courses, already had MOOC materials too, that if people wanted to use those to support what they were doing, they could. So Katie, since I started working with MOOCs, one thing that we really wanted to focus on is having an impact with the MIT students as well, and helping make the MIT community aware that these MOOCs exist, even if they're people that are doing research as research scientists. That's really one of the reasons we focused on getting the quantitative biology workshop course online. And so I'm curious, now that you are a first-year grad student at MIT, so I think first let's go back to that part of just how did you become a first-year grad student, and go through that story, and then we'll move on to the relationship with MOOCs.
Yeah. So I came to MIT because I was an MSRP student. I found MSRP, frankly, by chance, looking for summer programs, just basically doing Google search and scrolling through these endless documents of all these summer REU opportunities, trying to find ones that I thought were a good fit for me and that have, professors in the department, et cetera. People familiar with applying to summer internships and programs probably can relate to that. And so when I got in, I was ecstatic. Then the World Health Organization was like, well, we have a pandemic, so no in-person things. I was ecstatic again when Mandana said, hey, we're going to do it virtually. So that's certainly better than nothing. And in some ways, I think was more beneficial for me, at least, than even an in-person experience could have been, because I got to pick up skills and do things that I wouldn't have done otherwise. And one of those things was, like most people, the imposter syndrome hit hard. And I definitely wouldn't have applied to MIT if I hadn't been able to have the MSRP experience I had. In my head, I had already self-selected out of applying to MIT biology in the first place. And in fact, almost I came this close to not submitting my MSRP application as well, because I was thinking, oh, this program is phenomenal and I'm never going to get in. But I submitted anyways. And while I was here, we got lots of support from alumni, from current graduate students, from you, from other faculty that was, showed me that this was a place where I could do good research, do good work. And if I wanted to be here, then I could find a way to be here. And so in the application cycle and following MSRP, I applied and was very, very happy when I got in. And I'm now happy to be here as well. Moving to a city that I have never visited and a school that I had never been to, and only seen videos of and had Zoom calls with the people that I had known. So, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that perspective. We're definitely really excited that you were accepted to the program and that you're now someone that's regularly in our department that we could see on a regular basis. So we're really happy about that. Lillian, who we mentioned as well, she also is a first-year grad student in our department. And so I think that's really important, that attitude that you just shared of not even wanting to try, because there's probably high school students or undergraduates who will see this and then understanding, like, go for it, give it a try, and talk to people who are at these places and see what their perspective is. And so
yeah.
During your time as an MSRP student, you were able to not only work on development of MOOCs and this research, but you also took one of the MOOCs too. And in that time, you finished that quantitative biology workshop. And then can you give us a sense, was that useful for you? Was that helpful now that in your first year of grad school for the Department of Biology? For those that don't know, all you do is take courses. You don't start your research yet. So your main focus is really like these core courses that the department has.
Yeah, so 7 QBW, the Quantitative Biology Workshop, is another MOOC that Mary Ellen and team have made, and it was not even 100% useful. It was 1,000% useful. So I started it. It coincided fairly well with the beginning of MSRP Bio. So during that summer program, I was also taking this quantitative biology MOOC. Prior to that, I had that much coding experience. I didn't know, I knew what coding was, but I didn't know what I was doing. I didn't know Python, I didn't know R, I didn't know MATLAB, and QBW introduced me to all of those skills in a relatively short time period. In a relative context, it was a very rigorous course. So I enjoyed taking the MOOC. It was relevant to my interests as both a biologist and doing data analysis for education work. It was a fun MOOC to take. And now it's also it's had a lasting experience for me. So like Mary Ellen mentioned, we don't take, in our first semester, we only take courses. And in the second semester, we take courses and rotate. And we don't actually begin doing research in a lab until after we've finished our classes. And one of the core requirements for MIT biology PhD students is a quantitative requirement. And so most students will end up taking some sort of Python-based analysis or coding class. But QBW got me a little bit ahead, actually, and helped me find a passion for quantitative work. So I'm actually taking systems biology, which is a joint department course, which I would not have been able to take if I hadn't done QBW prior to coming to graduate school.
Great, thanks. Yeah, and I wanted to also just highlight that what you just said, that you were someone who had no coding experience and you went into this program. And then by the end of that summer, you were using Python and Jupyter notebooks to do the data analysis or creation of figures. And then one of the reasons that we went on to write the paper was that luckily you were able to work with us part-time past that summer because of the way your early graduation worked out, and you were applying to grad school and able to continue with us so that we could wrap things up and do more analysis until we got to that point of being able to write it out and write a paper on this. So another thing that we can think about is just how will online learning change or be impacted into the future, and just really teaching and learning in general. And I know for myself, just thinking about this question, we didn't really know at first, and MIT returned to in-person courses this semester. But I'm happy to see that a lot of people are adopting and continuing changes that they did during the semester, and not that they were just using a tool and then continue using that tool, but really thinking about what are the benefits of using this tool? Does it benefit TAs or students? And then continuing on with that. And not only just tools, but attitudes and relationships. You and I knew each other for so long just through Zoom, and then we finally met in person, but we still felt like we knew each other very well throughout that whole time period, I feel like. And then we, and just having that attitude now that people can work together online and remotely. And then we have more acceptance of using these tools to help support teaching and learning at MIT. Is there anything that you want to highlight there from your courses so far this semester, or just in general things that you've heard?
Yeah, I've noticed from comparing to pre-pandemic courses to during pandemic courses now, even though we're in person, there are still ways of engaging students that are still being used in the classroom. There are, like you mentioned, there are tools that perhaps tech-averse professors would never have touched in the first place that they now use regularly, that I think are definitely beneficial for forms of, for example, for formative assessment in the middle of a lecture hall. And so it's been, I think it's been ultimately a positive diversification of how people handle in-person lectures from now on.
Mm-hmm. Great. So really, I think now we can start to open it up to question and answer. I know Janine and Catherine have been working on collecting the comments in the chat and the questions that come up. So we'll try to just pick a few to get started with, and either Katie or myself or both of us will make comments on a given question. So one question that came up is that Don Jones asked, what percentage of registered students drop out of the course prior to finishing the course? And are there studies I can find on this that have analyzed the reasons?
So for the course runs that this was a question actually that Martha Lillian and I discussed fairly frequently when we were in MSRP, and I thought about for a long time afterward. And something somewhat difficult thing is that all of these analyses that we made were based off of data that has been logged from edX, not from necessarily asking students about their behaviors or interviewing students. And so what happens is sometimes students unenroll from a class. That's essentially a delete button where they decide, I'm not going to take this anymore. But a vast majority, it seems, just stop interacting with the class. And we can't necessarily say they have dropped out when they do that, because this is a competency exam model, there's a huge surge in student activity near the end when they maybe get an email or a reminder that says, hey, the competency exam is opening soon in this class that you are enrolled in. And people go, right, I'm still in that. And then they come back to the course. So it's very difficult to actually tell what dropout means. We just notice a trend, a decreasing trend in over time and how people interact with course materials. And so, but this is definitely something we've talked about before. Like, how do we get a fine tooth comb through there and figure out like who's interacting with what? And, you know, technically the course material is meant to be followed in a certain fashion, but if you know biology already, you could skip through it. So some activity that's in the later unit of the class may happen early in the time period of class opening. So yeah, it's, we would love to know what that percentage is, I think, but I don't know that we could get a completely accurate answer.
Yeah, I think it's great to highlight that point of it's not like traditional courses that give the clear-cut answers of registering, paying the tuition, and then having to really officially drop out too if you're not going to complete that course, and really like the intention of completing something for credit. And these courses, you know, in some ways can be like Netflix, that they're free to just enter, try out some, you know, watch it. There's people who are retired that do this for entertainment even. And so people have a lot of different purposes for what they're using the course for. We also, with this course, we definitely know that we see repeat learners. So if they don't make it in time for the competency exam, they decide to, okay, I'll join the next run. And so they don't really drop out, they just keep going and try it again. And so Katie, do you want to mention something about that?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So repeat learners was something that fascinated me for a little bit. It still does, but I don't have as many pretty figures in regards to that. What I can say is that there are a surprising number of students who take the course again and again and again, and sorting out who is repeating because they forgot the first time they enrolled they were in the course and they actually do want to finish it, versus someone who maybe teaches AP biology and wants to have access to those course materials as a teaching tool, versus someone who just consistently is taking the course every time because every time a topic trips them up and they want to get better the next time. I mean, these are just three examples of why people may repeat the course, and also why they may be seen as dropout students who didn't actually drop out of the course, but they're still getting the benefit from the MOOC that they wanted to get out of it. So yeah. And I also saw there was a follow-up question that Don asked is what, yeah.
Yeah, I was going to mention that he asked about the research studies related to this, and it is a really common topic of research, but I really don't like the idea of using the term dropout and classifying it as a black and white thing like we just mentioned. And so but if you search for things like dropout and motivations, there's a lot of research about, you know, students being self-regulated. And so that relates to your follow-up question of, you know, what can you tell us about helping more people complete? And so, I mean, what we see from the research so far is really a big skill set of being able to complete these courses, is having a lot of self-regulation to, you know, go to it, commit to it, and keep going back. And so sometimes that means people already have a lot of education, so they have a lot of experience with college, and so they're able to understand like, okay, I know how to pace myself and commit to this and put the time into it. Otherwise, it may be like very young students who are just really engaged or bored in their situations of the school they're in. And so they really want this challenge and they really seek these challenges outside of that too. Do you have more to add on to that, Katie?
No, I think that's a great response, is that it's self-regulation is really key. This is something, at least from the perspective of a student who was solely online for all of their education from the age of 12 to the age of 18, is that it's a skill that takes time and practice to cultivate, that some people struggle with more than others, and that self-accountability to finish a task that you and meet a goal that you set for yourself it's challenging, and it's challenging in different ways for different people. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just wanted to then, this sort of relates to what Alpha asked. Did all verified learners pay for registration, and just wondering why most didn't complete the course. And so verified track should be the people that are paying, but like Katie mentioned, some did get free access. You always can get financial aid and discounted access through edX, but during the pandemic, free happened even more. And then just wondering why most didn't complete the course. I think it relates to a lot of what we just said of, the people, this is really optional for them to do, and whether they have the right motivation and interest to continue and complete it, or if they're just there for fun. We, don't know unless we really do personal interviews with the students.
Yeah, I'll add that there in this question of repeat learners, when I poked at that a little bit, I found there were some learners who did indeed verify for the course multiple times. And again, like, we can only guess at what their motivations are. Some of these people I found, they did not certify the first couple times, and then the most recent time that they had verified, they certified. So we can, again, conjecture about how well they did the course, or if they finally were able to complete enough material to take the competency exam, etc. But it seems that even with people who pay for the verified track, it's not as much of a motivation to like definitely finish the courses as you might think it might be.
So Katie, Isidra has a question about the methods used in the paper and in your analyses. So why did you choose the minimum of one video being played, and the same for forums? Why did you choose just one post to the forum?
Great question. So we wanted to establish a bare minimum for what engagement meant. And the easiest way to make that a binary question of did you engage or did you not engage was a single event. And like I mentioned, because is watching one video engagement? Is making a single forum post engagement? Do I have to watch 5 videos before I'm considered engaged? You can see how that might become blurry as we raise the level of how many actions do I have to take to be considered an engaged student. And so that was the reason for choosing just one. But that was also why we followed up all of those questions with those box and whisker plots I showed you. So out of everyone on those box and whisker plots, every dot's a single student, and it's answering, okay, so you did at least one of the thing that I asked about forum, video, or problems. How many times did you do those engagements? With the thought being that the more times you do it, the more engaged of a learner you are. Which isn't necessarily the case for everyone, but it at least follows somewhat logically from that assumption. So that's why we picked just one to start with, and then looked at how many people actually did after the fact.
Yeah, so another set of questions that could be good to discuss here is, what about the course design itself, and then anything around that makes a difference with engagement, as well as, what have we learned about the length of videos and other mediums of instruction. So I think I'm going to actually address the video question first, just because that relates to some past research that Sarah Thornton and I did. And what we found in the molecular biology course, but we first noticed a pattern in this course, was that people engaged with the videos in a way that they were watching until completion the majority of the time. And so that goes against some other research that was done on MOOCs, saying there's an optimal time length of the 6 minutes. And what we find and what we care about more is that, like, it really is about the content in the video, and is it worth the students watching the video? If it could be skipped and they don't need the information to do the assessments, that they don't need to watch it, right? Or if it's not very interesting and engaging, then they may not need to do that. And so what we try to do in all of our MOOCs is that we set up things so that you have to watch videos, but also they're broken up into these smaller chunks, because we don't want to have it really be, very long videos that people have to get through, but that you were checking for their understanding after every 5 or 10 minutes, so that they're keep doing some activity and then checking and thinking about the content as they're working through. If they already know it, they could just skip through all the videos and just try the assessments. But at MIT, we really care about the doing problems and really working through and applying what you're learning. And so, we really think most of the learning is happening in this problem solving that they're doing in either the practice problems that are called test yourself questions in between videos, or the problem set type things that are a little bit more advanced or more applied, or exam or quiz level types of things. So Katie, do you have any other thoughts on that about design of the courses?
Certainly not any as as well formed as you, but I also, upon joining, also in conjunction with research, was helping design, or not so much design as just contribute to the creation of the 706 series. And so a lot of my contribution was in writing these test yourself questions. And so it's a very good pedagogical practice to follow up instruction with formative, immediate and thorough formative assessment. And that's what these test yourself questions essentially are, is formative assessment. And so like all things in online learning, we can't make the student take them, but there's a lot of evidence that it's much better for them if they perform better, and they learn better if they do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so one question from Anonymous is just how hard is the competency exam? Is it MIT level difficulty? And I can say, yes, we tried to make this as similar to the MIT experience as possible, because even though at that time MIT didn't have computer graded exams that we were necessarily giving students, we really feel like from the beginning, the MOOCs should represent what is happening at MIT and not be a watered down, easier form. We definitely have to make adjustments to the MOOCs, and we deliver them in modular fashion sometimes, just to make it easier for people who have kids who are working, who are doing other things, of being full-time students elsewhere, taking these courses, so they're more flexible in timing so that they can do things when they have the time to learn. But we also really want things to be similar to what the MIT experience is, and we really want to focus on this idea of applying and using what you know versus just memorizing facts, especially in biology, where it can end up being a lot of vocabulary or memorization in some cases, or what people may remember from high school. And we really try to focus on the molecular focus at MIT. And so, Katie, another question for you to think about, or maybe expand upon, is what did you enjoy most about the remote research experience?
What did I enjoy most? I think for me, it was the acquisition of new skills and context that I feel in hindsight I would not have gotten otherwise. So I probably would never have taken QBW if we hadn't had a pandemic. Not out of, not because I didn't want to, but because I either wouldn't have known it existed or wouldn't have had the time to take it. And so it's given me a very different change in perspective on how integrating, online learning with in-person learning, with however we decide that we want to learn things as adults going into the future, how that impacts our career paths and our perspectives on science, on society, on the world.
Great. Yeah, another question to address here is just how does a MOOC compare to an online course on campus? And so one thing I want to highlight with that is that typically MIT pre-pandemic did not have any online courses for credit. That MIT was really a residential experience, so students came to MIT to courses in person. And we ran these MOOCs as complete online courses, and they were separate experiences. I think during the pandemic, then the lines became pretty blurred. I think most of many of the online MIT courses, though, even pre-pandemic, we were doing what would be called hybrid or blended learning in some way, that we were using either the edX platform or other means to have interaction and engagement online, in addition to what was happening in the classroom. And then with the pandemic, then we had more emergency remote teaching. And so the format was really different, given that the MOOCs are meant to operate completely independent of other than people watching the forum and interacting in the forum, but it's not live. So there's not synchronous like there was during the pandemic when people were using Zoom to interact with their students in a synchronous manner. It really is meant to operate asynchronously. And then everything is computer graded. It's not meant to have the support of TAs hand grading things. So on campus, even though there was the option in some courses to use computer grading, there was still a lot, they still had the TA support and they could do exams or other assessments in a lot of the ways they did things pre-pandemic, but maybe just using different tools so students could do that online. Yeah, and so I think, it's about time to wrap up here, but is there anything else you want to mention or highlight, Katie?
I think there was one more question from Neil asking whether we had planned to investigate student engagement and motivation through interviewing or surveying. And so this is something we've talked about too. It's a bit difficult to actually enact. And then we're worried, of course, as always, about response bias if we actually do enact these things. And there's the fact that we've got several thousand students to go through, many of whom probably have lost their edX password and will never receive our survey. But it's definitely an idea that we've looked at before. Would love to be able to just sort of peek over their shoulder as they take the MOOC and figure out what they're thinking as they click on things. But that is, alas, not how we are able to collect data.
Yeah, for sure. And sadly, Katie is now a first-year grad student and not working with us in part-time mode, or even lucky that summer we had where she was full-time. So we lose Katie in this project, but there are other ways the group can carry on with Katie's work and continue thinking about this and working on it. But I think we're at time now, so I just want to wrap things up, and I want to thank everyone for coming today. Katie, it's been great to have this opportunity for you to discuss your work and to highlight that to everyone. And I want to thank Janine and Catherine for inviting us to do this today. And thank you to the audience for being really engaged and asking a lot of questions. And we really appreciate everybody taking time out today to join us.
Yes, thank you so much. This was an absolute pleasure. And thank you for all of the fantastic questions.